This is TWiT.
I was online last night, just kind of searching around, looking for stories that caught my attention. And Karen Howell from the MIT Technology Review tweeted out something along the lines of, I've been working 9 months on this piece. It goes live tomorrow. I can't wait, slightly nervous. And immediately I was like, all right, that sounds interesting. You work 9 months on a piece about Facebook. You're probably going to come up with some very, very juicy nuggets. And sure enough, Karen is with us today. Karen Howell writes for MIT Technology Review at technologyreview.com. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason.
Absolutely. It's great to get you on. Thank you so much for hopping on with us today. So well, first of all, what exactly set you on this path? Your article really focuses heavily on the powers inside of Facebook as relates to artificial intelligence, as relates to our democracy, as relates to algorithmic programming, and kind of both the battles on both sides of that. I mean, these are topics and stories that we've been discussing in general, throughout the country and the world for the last 4 years at least, pretty heavily and significantly. So what exactly set you down this path of exploration 9 months ago that kind of led you to reporting about Facebook's algorithms in the way that you did?
Yeah, so funnily enough, Facebook actually asked me to write a story about them. And the context for that is I cover artificial intelligence for MIT Technology Review. That is my beat, using journalism lingo. And I spend a lot of time specifically covering the intersection of AI and society, the impact that algorithms have on everything from, the way that it could discriminate against us to the way that it's affecting democracy, to the way that it's surveilling us. All of those things kind of encompass my beat. And I had previously written about a different research lab called OpenAI. I'd profiled them. And afterwards, Facebook actually reached out to me and were like, we loved your profile of OpenAI. We want you to write something about us and our AI team. And Facebook is a very large company, so they actually set about scoping out the piece with me, which is kind of an interesting comms tactic, by setting me up with interviews with a bunch of different leaders within the AI org and kind of checking in with me after every one and being like, what is piquing your interest? And when I had my sit down with Joaquin, I had done a little bit of research on LinkedIn into what roles he had held at Facebook. And I just saw this entry in LinkedIn that said he had been the director of the Society and AI Lab at Facebook, after being the director of the Applied Machine Learning team, which is the team that is the reason why Facebook is an AI company. And I was like, that is so interesting. I want to focus on that. And so I ended up telling the comms person, this is what I want to work on. This is like, I just want to understand, like, what is the Society and AI Lab? Facebook has a Society and AI Lab. And yeah, that started me off on a 9-month journey.
Yeah, wow. And I can only imagine what it's like to work 9 months on a story like this and then to finally have it kind of, from what I can tell, be the featured piece for MIT Technology Review right now. So congratulations on that. So I suppose we should talk about what you've discovered in this time. You had a conversation with Joaquin. Joaquin, is it Quiñonero?
Quiñonero, yeah.
Quiñonero, okay, the director of AI at Facebook. Obviously a super smart mind, a super smart guy. Good intentions, I would say, through reading the piece, but also kind of conflicted because Facebook's kind of machine in many ways goes counter to doing the right thing, whatever the right thing might be, because it wants to be a profitable business. And engagement is really that kind of metric that's the most important. We hear this all the time about Facebook. Engagement is the most important thing. Yet on the flip side of that, there's like the path, the destructive path that's left behind as a result of their pursuit of engagement. So I guess talk about the complicated mission that Facebook has when faced with these kind of polar opposite sides of the issue right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, Facebook is, in some sense, it's almost like any company in that its objective is to not necessarily. I mean, yes, it is to maximize profit, and it like ultimately it is beholden to its shareholders, which is different from some of the work that responsible AI strives to do, which is being beholden to the public and being beholden to society. And what was really hard in writing this piece was recognizing that Joaquin he's a great guy. He genuinely wants his team, Society and AI Lab, which eventually became the Responsible AI Lab, he wants that team to succeed, and he wants that team to do work that will help Facebook's algorithms not be so damaging in a variety of different ways. The problem is that a lot of that work then is directly in juxtaposition to the fact that Facebook needs to grow in order to keep its shareholders happy. And I should mention that it's in Facebook's case, what's really interesting is it's not necessarily even the shareholders that it's primarily beholden to, it's Zuckerberg's desire to grow Facebook as a company. And that is based on extensive reporting by many, many journalists that have sort of talked about how Zuckerberg has always had this obsession with like Roman emperors. And I don't even get into this in the piece, but he's always had this obsession with Augustus and with conquering. And it's infused in Facebook's culture, this desire to literally have every single person in the world use Facebook. And so that desire for growth is just when you develop your company incentive structures so that every single team is oriented around growth, and every single person on those teams, their compensation, their ability to get promoted is based on how well you effectively drive towards growth, then you will always sideline other work that is beholden to the goodness of society. And that is the fundamental tension that Joaquin has, is he's trying to champion this stuff, but it's just the entire system is oriented away from that.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it really, the word that comes to mind for me is paradox. It seems paradoxically that Facebook is at arms with itself in so many different ways between the business and ethical side of things. Another paradox, of course, is their content moderation system, which really goes counter to their content recommendation algorithm. They're like constantly battling. And yeah, like I don't know what the solution is there. I suppose ultimately it is finding a value system that goes above and beyond what the shareholders actually require. And when it lands in the lap of Zuckerberg, as we know him to be through stories like this and everything, there's not a whole lot of optimism as far as that happening. Because if there were a scenario that was bad enough to wake a company up from that malaise and have them go, oh, wait a minute, maybe there should be a significant change to how we do business. I feel like we've seen that scenario a number of times, and we're still kind of in this same position.
Yes, that's such an important point, because when I was covering this, it took me a while to piece together the timeline. I had this timeline where I was mapping out all the events, and then I was like, wait a minute, all of these things happened after Cambridge Analytica. And it took me a while to realize that, and that's how I start my piece, is being like, this is where Facebook was. And then Facebook said that Cambridge Analytica was its awakening, that it suddenly realized that it needed to reform itself as a company. And I'm like, okay, that's our starting point. So how did it do? Let's score the company on all of the promises it made after Cambridge Analytica and see if it actually made progress on these issues. Unfortunately, it didn't change any of the incentive structures within the company. So all of the teams that are still oriented around maximizing growth, maximizing engagement, are still maximizing growth and engagement. And Facebook loves to say, we fine-tuned our news feed algorithms so that now instead of just interactions, it's meaningful social interactions. They talk a lot about meaningful social interactions. And I talked with former employees who were like, that is still engagement. Like, you can name it whatever you want, but it still likes, comments, shares, and anything else that is trying to hook users into continually coming back to the platform and getting new users on board.
Yeah, indeed. Now, you also tweeted, along with the release of this piece, that your porting kind of led you to this conclusion that there is that ultimately self-regulation is ineffective. It cannot work. Talk us through that a little bit. Why is that kind of where this path led for you?
Because I realized that the people that are supposed to be empowered at the company to do this, and who, through specifically Joaquin, he has been appointed by leadership to lead the responsible AI team. He has been given budget, he's been given headcount, and he himself feels a significant he feels beholden to doing this right. And he spent a lot of time, I talk in my piece about how he spent a lot of time educating himself, because he had spent so much time just being a technologist focused on technical things. And then he started educating himself about how technology actually affects society. He started reading about algorithmic bias. He started reading about how technology can impact civic discourse, democracy, all of these things. And he feels very strongly that he wants to make a difference on these things. And yet it still doesn't work, and it's not, and it's very unique in this particular situation, because oftentimes companies will appoint outsiders to hold these positions. They'll hire some external expert that they then bring into the company to champion this stuff. And it's really key that Joaquin was actually an insider. He already has all of the correct relationships at Facebook from his previous role as the director of applied machine learning to make this work. He already is friends with all these people. He has worked on them with other projects before. And even still, like, literally all of the stars are aligned, and he still can't make this work because the rest of the machine is so oriented around growth. So if even he can't do it, then I really don't see any possible way that we can get to a point where self-regulation is effective. And they've been working on this problem for 3 years already. And essentially the 3 years have amounted to absolutely nothing that actually tackles the crux of the problems that people have been hammering Facebook about that undermine our democracy.
Yeah, indeed. Excellent answer. I follow completely on that, in agreement. Now, hours after your piece was published, Facebook published a research paper on algorithmic fairness, which it's interesting of the timing. Although it's one of those things. This research paper has been in the works for who knows how long. So I doubt they just whipped this together in the 3 hours since the time that. But it's entirely possible that Facebook and probably likely that Facebook knew something like this was going to be released, so they had some time to ramp up. What's your take on what they published and why right now? The timing was just kind of hard to ignore.
Yeah. So there's a story behind the story. So this paper was actually part of what they wanted me to cover when I wrote my piece. My piece talks about how when I was covering the responsible AI team, I kept asking them to talk about these problems of misinformation, polarization, hate speech, all of the things that have become really, have always been important, but since the U.S. Capitol riots, I felt like now is the time to really dig into why Facebook is not addressing these issues. And they never wanted to talk to me about that. They specifically only wanted to talk to me about algorithmic bias and fairness. And they kept telling me, we have this great piece. They gave me a draft copy of that, a great paper. They gave me a draft copy of that paper. They gave me a lot of documentation, internal documentation that the responsible AI team had written all about algorithmic fairness. And they kept pressing me to write about that specifically. And so the deal that the comms person had at the time with me, not knowing what I was actually going to write about, was we will time the release of this paper with your article, because they assumed that that is what I would be writing about. And so I told them specifically when I was going to release my piece. And I also gave them a no surprises email beforehand, which is, a journalistic thing you do when you're doing investigative reporting, where I listed out all of the claims that people who were not sources from Facebook had said, so that they had a chance to respond. And even after that no surprises email, they were like, we are still going to go forward with releasing this paper and releasing a blog post at the same time as your piece. And I was like, go for it. So that is why it is so perfectly timed at the same time.